Has the stock market officially made its bottom as we approach the end of November into December? When we look at what's happened across the board, you've seen the SPY, you've seen NASDAQ, you've seen we take a little bit of hits over the past, week to 2 weeks, give or take. But ultimately, when we look at the chart, you're finding some key support here as well, which is what we're really going to be talking about. Now, we also need to understand the fundamentals of what's really gone on here, because again, this is kind of what got us dropping from Fed Lisa Cook, addressing some big concerns out of the market, ultimately seeing the likelihood of a Fed rate cut dropped dramatically to 20%, but now spiking back towards 70% as we go in a week later. I mean, literally, what a wild, wild ride. Now, we'll also go into a little bit of what we talked about here in a previous video of Birdie's argument of what the real bubble is out there, because again, this ties right back into Fed Lisa Cook, but then ultimately, again, how Trump plans to save the market as well, and then ultimately what this means for everything else and what I'm doing in the market as far as buying, aggressive selling, what should I be doing? Let's dive right into it. Now, again, when we look at where we're at and where we're going, it's important to understand we can't really start jumping the gun just yet. Now, I'll say on Friday, when we look at the chart, you're finding some key supports here. That's the most important thing to understand. This goes all the way back to mid-September that we've held this level over and over and over. So again, very key to identify where we're at here on SPY. That being said, the candle that you put here in the day, we saw some aggressive buying, but also some aggressive selling near the end of the trading day on this past Friday. So again, it's worth mentioning, we're not seeing the great buying that we were seeing in the past where, you find the buying off this level and it's immediate straight back up, straight back up, straight back up every single time. So again, that's what we really want to see is continuation and getting us away from this support as quickly as possible. When you look at something like QQQ, again, it's, in my opinion, a little less impressive. Again, you came down a little bit further, as you can see there, but you're holding that same respective support as of right now, but you're ending the day right in it. So again, QQQ isn't as impressive, but what I really want to do is attack where we're at going into this week. Now, it's important to know this is a holiday week. I do want to make that abundantly clear. Hey guys, I also want to say, if you are not subscribed to the channel, I do really appreciate it. If you guys don't know, I try to post 2 videos a day during the week on the market or education, something along those lines of how I'm trading, what I'm looking at. But right now, around 50% to 60% of the people watching the video are not subscribed, surprisingly enough, but it really does mean a lot. It really does help out. And I try to get these videos out as quickly as possible so you guys can have all the information. We also have a TikTok where I'm posting there as well, going live usually when I'm making these videos to answer questions, and then as well as Twitter. So always tap in there with all the charts and updates. Let's get back to the video. But I also will go into what's happening here as well as far as the economic report and what you can see coming in, because again, we're getting a lot of back data for PPI, CPI, etc. So we're getting some of that coming into this week. So Tuesday you'll have core PPI, which will be the first one that we had in a while. Going into Wednesday, you will have, I believe, PCE data coming out as well. Core PCE, which is the Fed's favorite source of what's happening there as well. PCE prices, I'm sorry, not core PCE. And then your GDP is there as well. So again, what we'll see coming in there. So PCE should probably be coming in next week, ideally. But again, what to assume and look at the beige book will be probably the most impressive thing that we'll see all week, because it again will be the only thing not impacted from the government shutdown. So that is worth mentioning what we'll be seeing on the week. Now, also again, it's a short week, so understand that no trading on Thursday, and then I think a half trading day on Friday as well. So I expect volume to be very, very low. If we get a surge of volume, it'd be a really big surprise. If we get any big news, it would also be a pretty big surprise as well. So I don't expect us to just see buying flooding the market or selling flooding the market. If that does happen, that would be a big surprise. Go back to the previous few years of what happens on Thanksgiving week. Typically, we trade in a pretty small range. Nothing really gets that crazy, especially on holiday weeks, and short weeks especially, okay? Important to understand that. Now, we'll go a little bit deeper into here as well. It looks like a lot, but again, I'm going to skim over some of this because we've already covered a lot of this. What I do want to say right now, though, guys, if you do want to get access to the Discord, we're having our Black Friday sale. It's not started yet. It will start tonight at midnight. If you are interested, it'll start at 60%, and every day it'll get cheaper and cheaper, or it'll get more expensive because the discount code will get less and less. So 60% the first day, second day, probably 50% down to 40%, etc. until Friday. So take advantage while you can. This is the only time that we do lifetime memberships. The link will be down below. None of the discounts are added yet. They'll be added literally tonight at midnight. So if you want to see that, take advantage while you can. Now, again, what we'll talk about really quick is what's happening here. So where I want to start at with fundamentally is, again, and highlighting what's really got us to where we're dropping, because we need to understand what's actually causing selling, and then ultimately going back to the point of, has anything actually changed? Because when we go back to previous cases back here on NASDAQ or QQQ, when we saw some aggressive selling, it's important that we understand, like, has anything actually changed fundamentally in the stock market, right? From that understanding. And ultimately, that's why we continue to bounce and bounce and bounce, right? So when we jump back into this, Lisa Cook, what'd she say? And it's important to understand. I love showing the picture of her because, again, we should all know who to blame for this little bit of a dip. Lisa Cook warned about what was happening with high valuation stocks, corporate bonds, housing, leveraged loans increase the risk of sharp market declines. So the financial system was resilient, so she wasn't really worried. But again, she just brings up all these concerns, but says the market looks fine, but you should be concerned, which is crazy. And then addresses AI being bad for potentially destabilizing the markets and the housing, or not the housing, but the unemployment rate as well. So again, the market literally got hit from this. And again, this was all really tied back into, what Michael Burry was saying as well. So Michael Burry came out with this giant argument. And if you want to get a full breakdown of this argument, I broke it down pretty much in detail here as well. You can actually go see that video right here. Are we in an AI bubble? You can go watch that video. I did a complete breakdown of stocks you should be looking at, etc., and what the real concern is. So you can go watch that for yourself. But again, that kind of tied right back into there. And so this also ties back into what we're seeing from a lot of these, bear theses coming out, like Oracle being overvalued and all these stuff that's happening there, but discounting certain logical metrics. So again, all that's there for you. But again, even though we saw that, it's important to understand what's happening with the rate cut decision, or the odds of a rate cut happening here in December. The red line represents that. So obviously, since August basically into November, it was just higher and higher and higher, the potential chance of getting a 25 BPS cut, right? And so what happens here is, funny enough, you are sitting here at highs, and then you just dump here. And you kind of drop a little bit, don't get me wrong, and then you really decline from basically like an estimation of 65%. Basically, you drop all the way down to like 20% chance of getting a cut. Now, granted, worth mentioning, the 50 BPS did get a little bit, or no change, got a spike right there, as you can see right there. So it's important to understand that, and now they kind of inverted back to normal, ending the day on Friday. So we're back to right where we were, of sitting at around 65% likelihood of a 25 basis point cut. Yet the market, if we look, isn't really bouncing or reacting to that. So the concerns of what we were looking at, of got us here, nothing's changed. We're right back to where we really were. And, for everyone, pushing this agenda that we're in this AI bubble, and maybe it's true. I say this all the time. Maybe it is true that we are in a bubble. But I think the really important thing to think about in what's happening here is that nothing's really there yet. Like we have no evidence of an AI bubble just yet. And that's a very important thing to be thinking about and understanding. Because when we come back here, like what do the numbers actually suggest? Because, that's the most important thing for me when I look at this, is the numbers here specifically, and showing you the Mag 7 combined revenue so far. And when you look at what they're doing quarter over quarter, year after year here, from quarter number 3 of this year to quarter number 3 of 2020, it's important to look at the overall growth. I mean, this is just the combined revenue just slowly upticking over time. Like you had some hiccups here, but don't get me wrong, you're just continuing to just scale and scale and scale. Now, some of those companies are, doing better. Some of the companies are doing worse. Important to understand that. But overall, as a whole, it's not just NVIDIA that's increasing the revenue. It's the whole Mag 7 across the board is doing very, very well. Okay. That's really important to understand of what's actually going on here. That numbers are still going up, the market's still growing, and that's really where we're at. And for as much as we want to say, oh, it's all just NVIDIA, NVIDIA is the blue box up here. You have Amazon doing really well. You have Meta doing making more money than NVIDIA right now. Maybe not as much growth, but still doing very well. You go into Apple, growing still, one of its better quarters going back to 2024. You can look at Google down here, its best quarter ever, right? Growing rapidly as it takes the lead spot in that AI race. Microsoft's really steady overall growth as well, right? So the staples of where we're at, and even though we want to highlight all day long that it's, what's happening with NVIDIA and it's all just AI, et cetera, these other companies are doing extremely, extremely well. That's really important to understand. So despite, everyone harping on and saying this is, this a massive bubble, and you can go look at the valuations, and I recommend going and watching that bubble example, because I do break it down as much as possible, and I do have concerns here. But again, when we look at what's the true staple and what's really holding the market together, the Mag 7, the largest companies in the world, right? The ones that are all valued over $1 trillion almost, right? those ones are killing it. Those ones are still doing good. Those ones are still growing. So you're trying to time a top is what I'm trying to say. And nothing fundamentally has shifted or changed so far in the market. The growth hasn't slowed down. The bubble hasn't popped. That's important to understand. And that's where we're at right now. And then on top of that, you have to understand who's actually running this country. And that leads me back into Trump. And I think Trump, I tweeted this out a few days ago, and I recommend following on Twitter. The link is for you there for Twitter down below. Again, I post all my charts, everything here, what I'm looking at, different setups, etc. It's all there. I try to make as much free content as possible. So if you guys can't afford to pay for Discord, you still have tons of stuff out there for you, right? But I don't believe Trump is like gonna let this market dip right now. I just don't think he's going to, right? You know, you start seeing this dip on the market, and then Trump just comes out and it's like, you know what, guys, I've been floating it around with my team. Like we might let Nvidia sell chips to China. We might do that. And maybe it's all talk because, again, we have to, you know, I want to be transparent and honest and unbiased. And Trump has done a lot of talking over the past, few years. But who knows? You know, everyone was saying that the stimulus or the dividend is going to be, all talk. But it looks like that's going to get added in as well sometime this year. So we'll see. But it's really important to understand this. If Trump opens the door to Nvidia and to China, I mean, that's just a whole nother source of revenue. They're already have signed contracts across the board, fulfilling them to $500 billion going into the end of 2026, which is absurd to really think about. And so when we're trying to say this is a bubble, and maybe it is, but again, you don't get special rewards for being early. And some people, we want to say being early, and Michael Burry said it, he tweeted out the other day, being early doesn't mean you're wrong. In a way, it can mean you're wrong. Because if you're 2-3 years early and you're sizing in for the drop's going to happen in the next 2 years, you're still wrong because it hasn't happened. So again, for me, I like to react to what the market's doing, what it's giving us. And as of right now, when I look at the market from a fundamental viewpoint, it's just not there yet. So again, I think there are some major concerns here. I think there are, if we start breaking down on SPY and losing these supports, things can get ugly. And I think technicals are key. But as a whole, when I'm looking at this, I'm not really that concerned right now. Now, I want to start with the bad. I want to start with the bad first, okay? So with the bad first, we're going to start here with NQ, okay? Now I'm going to start with futures, and I'll go back into SPY and QQQ. So if we look at NQ, if you're just looking at this chart, it is worth mentioning. You are in a downtrend on these smaller time frames, like the 4 hour going into this, right? This is clearly like a 4 hour, 2 hour downtrend, right? So basically we've topped out going into basically, I think it was like October 30th, give or take, right? October 30th around Halloween, we top out. That's our high that we put in. As you zoom in here as well, you can kind of see, we'll just address this really quick. So you can go in here as well. That's your high. You put in a lower low there, a lower high. You put in another lower low, another lower high, lower low, and then you almost make a higher high, but again, lower high, and then a lower low here. So this is the very definition of a downtrend. Very important to understand that. And then on top of that, also worth mentioning, you have lost your 50 EMA, which has been a massive support. So these were the real big signs of concern here on NQ for me, right? Because you've seen NQ going all the way back to earlier this year in summer, basically holding your 50 EMA as a clear-cut support for literally like 6-7 months. So that's it. That's the really important part to really understand what's happening there. So important that we're transparent and honest about that. Similar case here on ES, doing the very same thing. Okay, that is worth mentioning. I want to make that very clear and abundantly clear as much as possible. Now, I also want to say real quick, where you really start to flip the script of like, okay, this is probably like you're going to get a crash, you're going to get a dramatic drop, is when you start to lose the 200 daily moving average on NQ and ES. Going back, for example, we go back to earlier this year with the tariffs, etc. Where did things get really bad is when you lost the 200 daily moving average. You had a good drop here on ES, but when did you get a big drop is when you got below, right? You held below and then you ended up plummeting down like dramatically. Same thing on NQ. I'm not sugarcoating it. You guys know if you've been here on the channel for any time at all, that is when you see big and aggressive selling is below the 200 daily moving average. Now, again, you didn't have to time the top. You didn't have to do anything like that. You just waited, you were patient, and that's where things got aggressive. And even here, like I wasn't getting aggressive on the short side until we started flipping below the 50. And I'm like, okay, well, this is this really solid opportunity now. So it's important to understand the ins and outs of what's actually happening here. Now, again, I know I was getting bearish underneath this, but as of right now, if we're holding this area, you do like what you're seeing. Because again, you can also see you're holding that previous all-time high as of right now. Now, I think this week is I don't want to say this week, but I think the next 2 weeks are very key to seeing how we actually respond. It's really unfortunate that we're getting this week coming in at a time like Thanksgiving because, again, like I said in the early part of the video, volume is going to be very dry. You're not going to get a lot of action, okay? That is worth mentioning. So going into something like SPY, just tracking back to last Thanksgiving, I believe last Thanksgiving was the last, should have been the last week, obviously, of November. So again, going back to Thanksgiving of last year, giving you an example of how we moved. I think you actually, yeah, we'll go back here. Bump. We'll draw it out so you can see as well right around here. This was your Thanksgiving break right there, give or take right in this little range, right? You didn't really do much. You did scale up over time, but like, again, it was very, very slow and steady. And this was a very bullish time because you were obviously bottoming out here mid-November and you just went straight up. So that is worth mentioning. This is shortly after to the election, et cetera, which was really bullish for SPY overall. So you didn't have that much action there, right? And again, I'll go back another year just to show you an example. So again, when people see action this week, and I'm not saying that you're not going to get any movement, I'm not going to predict the future, but it's worth mentioning, you just typically don't get a lot of action on weeks where, again, you're number one, the market's going to be closed for a few days, right? Close one day and close another half day. It might be even half day on Wednesday. I'm not really positive. But again, worth mentioning, you go back to November here. Again, this was even the week before, as you can see there, that was your Thanksgiving break. Nothing really happens. Again, we can go back another year, right? If you don't believe me. So we'll do the last 3 years. I haven't done this already, as you can see. But again, I'm just scrolling back so you can go back and see what's happening here. Again, Thanksgiving was right around this time. We'll do from the last November 30th all the way there. Again, nothing really happened. You just sat in a range. So again, it's worth mentioning, worth watching, worth talking about of where you're at and how you're moving and ultimately what's going on there in the market. So we don't start jumping to conclusions or anything crazy. But again, where we're at right now, and again, I just don't expect any crazy movement. So that's why I'm saying this part is unfortunate, but we'll see how we react. Important to know. So again, I think this is key. What we should be looking at. Okay. Now, I also think right now, you're in a really good spot for adding stuff long-term. And again, I've been making a lot of videos on stocks that I like long-term, so you can go watch those as well. The top videos I would say are going to be the 3 stocks to buy during the crash. Number 1's a really good one. I think you can learn a lot from that one. The NVIDIA earnings, buying these stocks, also important, also good. And then the top 5, those are all pretty good videos as far as value names I'm buying, and then less aggressive names as well. You can go into those. The most recent one I think is the least aggressive, and I still think has a really good play out because I do think you need to be playing what's going to happen with AI, data center build out, et cetera. I think it's the biggest opportunity out there in the market right now, so I'd recommend watching that. But as we're looking at this, I think this is where I'm looking at this from a viewpoint of, okay, has anything fundamentally changed? And I think this is like what goes into the mentality of what I'm looking at before I make bigger plays, bigger investments, leaps, etc. And when I'm looking at this, I just don't fundamentally think anything's changed. If anything, I think we're just getting to this point where companies are ramping up more and more. They're putting more, they're shoving more chips into the middle of the table. And so I do think you at least have one more run left in you. But one last ride, dare I say. And so I do think that's where you try to get kind of aggressive in some of these points with the viewpoint of, I like what we're doing. But again, shifting your chips to the point of understanding, okay, well, this is a little bit less risky and these have less fallout potential, in my personal opinion. So again, what I'm doing there. As far as day trading this week, I'm going to be taking it pretty easy. I'm not looking to go crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Trading in a range, probably have more to lose than I do to gain. That is worth mentioning. So again, not going to be going crazy there either. Okay. But the companies that I'll be watching the most here, I will go into those really quick. Okay. So going into something like NVIDIA, if NVIDIA gets back above 184, it's going to be your level to watch. Even on the bounce in the news of the Trump stuff that's going on in China, you saw a bounce in 184 and rejection. So as long as you're below 184, you're very cautious. And I'd be honestly a little bit bearish looking for some more downside. We came to 174 and bounced. Good to see. But let's see if we can get back above 184. Above that, I like it a lot. Leaps make a lot of sense. I like NVIDIA a lot. You guys know I don't think it's going anywhere. Just think it's still a great name. Another name to watch is going to be Meta. I think Meta is a must watch. I think Meta, I've gone into it. I think Meta as a day trade, it makes a lot of sense on the downside. But if you start remounting 601, 605 here, I think you're getting the most bang for your buck when it comes to Mag 7 names across the board. I think I'd be doing it in service if I didn't mention that. Again, I mentioned it in a previous video that I covered as well, going into Meta as well. Let me zoom out and go in here to Meta. But when you look at the forward-looking PE ratio on Meta, again, you're at a 19, and that's just crazy. It's the only Mag 7 name that's operating in a forward-looking PE ratio that low. Just makes a lot of sense here. Do what you got to do. I like Meta a lot. They're doing really good. And when you go back to that graphic of what I showed here as well, as far as how the Mag 7 companies are performing, overall Meta is doing really good. They're steadily going up as well. Best quarter, if not ever, when it comes to overall revenue coming in. Again, they're spending a lot of money. I will say that they're spending a lot of money. However, I think they're going to figure this out as well, and I'm a big fan of what Meta is doing there. So again, would be watching that. When you look at some of these other names that are doing really good, like Google, again, Google is still really strong, probably the strongest name in the market next with Apple right now, right? And rightfully so. But again, Google is, just sitting at highs. You're not really getting a deal on that buying here. Warren Buffett did buy it near 250, 245 or something around that range. But that's worth mentioning where you're at there. You're not really getting a deal. You're not, still operating really good, but you're not buying value at that point. Meta, I think, is giving you value. Personal opinion, okay? But again, NVIDIA, very interesting. Meta, very interesting. Also watching Microsoft here. I think Microsoft is getting to the point of you are getting a bit of a deal. This is one of the names that I mentioned as well on Twitter. Again, I've been telling you guys about this. I mentioned in Discord, obviously, as well. But again, on Twitter, again, so I always tell you guys to follow. You go on Twitter and look. Call this out weeks ago, November 18th, we talked about the double top here, right? Getting the break of that low, pushing down to 470. I've mentioned it here on the channel as well. Obviously, you got that action right down to our level of 468.6. Again, the same key level was your previous all-time high and your 200 daily moving average. I think you're getting a deal here on Microsoft as well. Very important to understand. And again, when you just look at what they're doing, how much money they're bringing in, it's a pretty sweet spot as well. Again, it wasn't a crazy overall growth from the last quarter, but as you can still see here, they're putting in record numbers. Like, it's not like really slowing down. These numbers are most likely going to keep tracking to the upside as well. Again, worth mentioning, worth watching, worth paying attention to. Okay, just telling you right now. So again, Microsoft's at a pretty big level, and I don't think this justifies what's going on there. So again, what I'd be looking at there as well. Again, I'm not going into any crazy plays of saying going long, full send, anything along those lines. I'm just showing you the big names that have carried us and where they're at right now, respectively. Okay, just letting you know. Amazon is one of the only names I'm a little bit concerned about, but I will say Amazon is right back at your major support again, the 200 daily moving average, and you basically held this since around August. It's definitely been one of the weaker Mag 7 names out there. I will tell you that right now. But again, it's still holding there. If you start losing 212, 210, I could see this getting pretty ugly, but I still think Amazon's one of the best buys out in the market. I mean, they're spending a lot on their build out, but I mean, it's Amazon. What are we talking about? So again, definitely you're getting value there as well for all things that are considered here. So again, worth mentioning, worth tracking. One of these smaller names out there that I think is really interesting and it's getting destroyed right now is Oracle. You're back at your 2024 highs from December, which is worth mentioning. Again, I haven't made a video on this. I'll probably make a video later on. I made one for Twitter, I think, and TikTok. But again, there's this idea that or Oracle is like in the red. Like, again, if you might have seen it, I recommend going and watching the video or reading the article from Financial Times. It's the craziest article, one of the craziest articles I've ever read. And I really do believe this is the craziest article I've ever read. It's so stupid. People like to say that like influencers and this and that, or we're scummy, we're this, whatever. Okay, and I do think you should go back and fact check just about anyone and everyone that you're watching online. I really do think so, because I could literally say anything and be uneducated, and yeah. But I try to always provide facts so you guys can do less research on the back end if you need to, but fact check everything I say. But when you go to these news articles of what's coming out here and what's being pushed to the average person, like someone probably watching this video, it is absolutely absurd that someone's allowed to put this out. Like, I imagine that if someone working for the Financial Times should be more qualified to publish something in something like the Financial Times than me posting something on YouTube. That's my personal opinion. Again, I'm just a regular person. I went to college, studied finance, etc. But I think that if you're working for a billion-dollar company, whatever it may be, and journalism, you should have to have some prerequisites. This is the craziest shit, and this is one of the best examples out there of what's being forced down people's mouths and going, like, you're forced to look at. This is crazy. Oracle's already underwater on its astonishing $30 billion OpenAI deal. Do you know how they're justifying that it's down that much? It's the craziest shit you've ever seen. They're saying because the stock price has dropped. That's why they're red. That is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. This was the stock price whenever that was announced. You shot up, you came back down. That's the stupidest thing I've ever seen. They're not actually red on anything. Do they have a crap ton of debt? Yes. Are they taking out loans to build out a bunch of shit? Yes. But why are we not talking about the TikTok deal? Why are we not talking about future? Like, we're not talking about any of this. We're just saying crazy things. That's like me saying, yeah, guys, Apple, when you dipped, yeah, man, yeah, going back to 2022, man. Yeah, Apple's red on the year, man. I don't know if you know this, but they're underwater on all their new iPhone sales. They're underwater. That'd be so stupid of me to say. That'd be so illogical. Yeah, their China sales are down, so they're underwater right now. No, Apple's still making a shit ton of money. So again, be careful with what you're listening to. Even these news articles, guys. It's unfortunate, like there's no vetting. But again, I just try to share facts, what's actually out there, my personal opinion. Always do your own research. Use me as an indicator, not as a signal at any way, shape, or form. And again, I think you'll do pretty well in the market if you just put time in. Hopefully, usually time in produces decent results. Have a good one. See you guys tomorrow. Have a good one, traders.